Okay, this is subnetting for people who really don't like to mess with calculation stuff like that. So I'm going to help you memorize this simple calculator that you can create anywhere you go, classes or in a job, and you'll never have to worry about how to do subnetting again, guaranteed. All right, first thing you're going to do is take a piece of paper and write down the 8 dots. So you just make 8 dots on a piece of paper, and then give that each dot its own bit value, because what we're doing is we're indicating the value of the bits. We'll be working with a standard internal network or a local area network today, and that is the 192.168.1.0 is the one we'll be using. It's not something that can be routed out. It's something that's internal to your internal network, and that this these numbers with the 192.168 cannot go outside. They are in there. So just so you know that even though you might have that IP address on your computer, that's not what other people see. Your other people see the router's IP address. And this is a typical Class C. So Class C, you're going to have your subnet mask is 255.255.255.0. And it's telling us pretty much, it's letting us know that the only number we're going to be dealing with is this last one. These are already filled up. 255 is the sum of these numbers. So if you add all these up, you'll get 255. And as you can see, we have 4 octets. So this octet's filled up with all turned on. The Each one of these bits either can be turned on or turned off. They can't be anything else. They can't be a 2 or a 3 or a 5. They're either a 1 or a 0, on or off. The 1 is on. So in these cases where the subnet mask you see 255, that means that all the numbers in the first octet is they're all turned on, and the second and the third. But we're working with the fourth one. So maybe I should put a period here so you notice that. I don't even think you can see it, but there it is. Anyway, the idea is that you're separated from the other 3 numbers. We're just looking at this with these bits, and I want to make sure you understand that. In this third octet that I'm pointing at, it looks just exactly the same with all the same bit numbers. So if you were to lay it out, you would see um, this same thing in each one of these. We would have 4 sets of them separated by periods, and they would all have exactly the same bit number. So on the first one, you would have 128, 64, 32, blah, blah, blah. The next one, the same, and we're in this one, and as you can see, it's the same. So each octet stands alone as itself. So we're just working on the last one because uh, we don't have access to the other ones. These are all closed off. And so is the network. You'll see 192.168.1 does not change. The only one number we're going to be changing when we're subnetting is the last one in a Class C. Class B, of course, we'll be doing 2, and I have a video for that as well. Okay, so I laid out the 8 dots on the piece of paper. I'm sitting in front of the class. This just takes seconds, but I'm explaining it a little closer so that, it's going to be a one-time thing for you. You'll get it. You lay out the 8 dots, you give them the bit values with starting with 1. This is important, you don't forget that. This is the only place where you start with 1. And you count backwards. And you're doubling the numbers all the way. You don't want to forget that. It's real important. And you don't want to mess up. It should end up with 128 at the end, and you won't mess up that way. Now I'm doing the network line, and I'm starting with 2, and I'm going in the right direction, doubling as I go, just like I did the last time. And you'll notice that if you start with 2, you start out double, you're going to end up double. See what I mean? So you started out with 1 going left, and you ended up with 128. Now with the network line, we're starting with 2, and we're ending up with 256. And you don't want to forget that. You make sure that you start with 1 going left on the bit value. And on the network line, we're doing starting with 2 and going to the right. All right, next I lay out my host line, and you'll notice I put N minus 2 and H minus 2. That's networks minus 2, host minus 2. Um, Many of you won't need to do the minus 2 for the networks because you'll be using the zero network. Um, but a lot of the people that I help are in the typical IT class where they don't use the zero network, and uh, they will have to take away 2 for both the network and the host, which I don't know why they do that because you only really have to take it away from the host, and you should always use the zero network. Okay, anyway, let's continue. What I'm doing here is I'm setting up a thing so you can make a calculator out of this, and it's going to be really easy once it's all laid out. All right, now I've added the sitter line or the cider line, depends on how you pronounce it. It's CIDR. It doesn't really matter what it means. You can go through the books and find out all about it. But this is just basically what this thing tells you how many bits have been used. And we know that we used 8 to fill up that, to make that 255, right? Because you have to turn them all on. So it's asking you how many are ones. This tells you how many ones have been used already. So that's 8, plus 8 more is 16, plus 8 more is 24, and then we've got 0. So we're here, these are all zeros. But all these in front of us were all ones. So this is just telling us that all these in front are ones. We're not going to be working with them. We're not going to look at them. It's none of our business right now. We're only focusing on that last octet, and that's what's in these 8 bits right here. And if 24 were already used, and if we go in here and borrow 1, then it would be 25 were used. If we borrow 2, 26 would be used, right? So that's how this tells us how many we've used. It's pretty basic, but it helps in the calculator, and you'll see what I mean. All right, here's something I'm adding that I didn't add on my last video, and it just makes it a little easier on the calculator. And that is this top line up here. Remember we put in the bits and then we put in the bit values. Um, when we're working with our subnet mask, we're going to have to add up bit values. So all I did was go ahead and add them, and that's what it's showing here. This top line is just, you know, this plus this equals that. These 3 together equal that. These 4 together equal 240. These 5 together equal 248. So it just makes it easier so once you draw your line, it'll be real easy to see. You won't make any mistakes on your numbers. I didn't include the first one because it's 128. Okay, so this is what you're going to see when you're sitting in front of your, at the desk. If you have time to put these added up, you can do that. It makes it better, I think. You don't have to because you can just add them once you get to it. If you have to borrow 4, you can add up those 4 pretty quickly and get 240. But if you draw a line and you just look at it, it tells you all your information. It's already there. That's why I think it's kind of cool to put it there. And it only takes a few seconds extra to put it there, and you'll be sure you don't make a mistake. All right, and the n minus 2 is something else that you have to ask about. So make sure you ask your professor, you know, do we take away 2 for our networks? That's pretty simple. And if he says or she says, yes, you take away 2, then say, are we supposed to use the zero network? Of course, the answer should be no. Why are we taking away 2 for networks if we have the zero network? All right. So for those of you who don't need to take away 2, you can get rid of that minus 2. And you will be starting with the zero network, and we'll explain all that coming up here. All right, now let's just suppose that in the test or in the little quiz the teacher asks you, they have this subnet. Now, these 3 numbers in the network this is not a subnet, this is a network. These 3 numbers in this network uh, are provided to you by the teacher, so you don't have to concern yourself with them. If there's something else, don't worry about it because it doesn't matter. The only thing you need to concern yourself with is the last number. And the subnet mask will be, if it's a Class C, the teacher's just going to tell you that's it. Unless, of course, the teacher starts giving you examples of full IP addresses with a sitter number / indication beside it and asking you, is that what subnet is that in and all that. And we'll get to that here shortly. You're going to get all that. All these examples are coming your way. All right, so in this example, I'm going to suppose that the teacher wants 6 networks. Well, let's change it because I did that in my last one. Let's say that the teacher wants 12 networks in this case. All right, so I'm going to go to Mr. N and I say, Mr. N, I need 12 networks. Professor wants them. So he says, slide on over and find you 12. So I slide on down the list. 8's not enough. 16. Somewhere in here is 12, but I can't use that because that's 8. So I have to come over here. This is where my line is going to be drawn because I have to get to 12 or more. Can't go less than the number he asked for. And if it's a situation where they're not using the zero network, you're going to have to take away 2. So, in this case, once we draw the line, we'll be able to get up to 16. He wants, or up to 14. He wants 12. Now, if you're in Cisco or you use the zero network, you're going to be able to get 16. All right, so let's get started. Okay, so I put the line after the number that, he said he wanted 12 networks. So I need to find it. So I went down here. I asked Mr. Network for 12. I went down the network line. Remember, it's right here beside the end. Don't get confused with all these other numbers. It's right under the dot, your networks. If he asks for hosts, you're going to get that. You're going to use the same process, and I'll show you. All right. So what's the line tell us? It's going to give us our whole answer is in that line. That's it. Finished. You can wipe your hands and say, I'm finished. I'm walking away. Of course, you need to understand what that tells you. So we're going to do that right now. He wants 12 networks. So we went to Mr. N. He said 12. We went over here. All right. So here's our slider line, and it's pointing to the number of networks we're going to get. It's also pointing to the number of hosts we're going to get. It's telling us our sitter number. It's telling us our magic number. Let me do something. Make it a little bit. All right. Tells me my magic number, which is right here, 16. So it also tells me what my subnet mask is going to be right here. So here's what my subnet mask is going to be. So I'm going to change the 0 for the subnet mask. I know what my magic number is going to be. I know I'm going to get 16 networks unless my teacher tells me I got to take away 2, and then I'm going to get 14. I know I'm going to get 16 hosts minus 2, so I'm going to get 14 hosts, and there's no discussion. You've got to take away 2 hosts, and the reason for that is one of the hosts goes to the network and one goes to the broadcast, and we'll explain all that here shortly, so don't get confused with that. You're going to get 14 hosts out of each subnet, and you're going to get 16 hosts if you use the zero network. I mean 16 networks if you use the zero network, and you'll get 14 hosts in each one of those networks. So here's your whole answer. Everything's here. And if for some reason, if for example he said I want 30 networks, well then the line would have moved over here because there's the network line. You would have slid down. 16 wouldn't have been enough. He wanted 30. You would have put the line here. And what would that have told you? That would have told you your sitter number is 29, right? With the line here, then the hosts are on the right side of the line. The only thing that's on the right side of the line are the hosts. And you would have only got 6 hosts per subnet, but you would get the 32 subnets if you use the zero network, or 30 if you don't. use the zero network. Most classes, they won't use the zero network in this operation. Even if they do use the zero network, they're not, you don't have to list it. Depends on the class or the teacher. You want to make sure that you're, this is a lot of times it's a big uh, bump in your grade if you figure out this subnetting because it's not that easy. In the little IT classes and stuff that you're taking in your colleges and stuff. But Cisco, they're going to use the zero network. Okay, so now you've got all this information based on what he asked. Now he asked for a set number of networks, so you knew to slide the line down until you fit that number. If he asked for a set number of hosts, you could have done the same thing. If he said, I need 14 hosts per subnet, give me as many subnets as I can get, well, you would have known. You slid down until you got to here. That's 14, 16 minus 2, and you would have put your line here because the line has to be on this side of those. And that would have told you all this other information. If he would have said, here's another good example. Let's say he gave you a specific IP address. Let's say he gave you this one and said 192.168.1.35/26. And now he wants to know what subnet that's in and what network, because of course it's going to have to be subnets because we see the 26. And we can slide over here, we can see the 26, so we can put our line here. That gives us all our information, right? So if he puts a slide here, then that tells us everything about the subnet. So now I'm going to show you how to set up your subnet once you have this information. All right, so we have all our information and we need to fill out our little chart. Well, they might have given you a chart like this in your class, or you might have seen these when you're doing the classwork. It says, network, range, and broadcast. So you need this information in order to work out the concept, and this is going to help you majorly in understanding how it works. So our main network is 192.168.1.0, and we're only going to be changing that last digit because that's the last octet that we're messing with. All right. Okay, I'm just going to give you a few examples because I don't want to spend all day on this thing, and I think you'll get the concept and then you'll be able to fly through this. It'd be so easy for you. Okay. Remember when I said the magic number was 16? Because we always use the bit value next to the line as our magic number. This is so important, and you got to remember this. If anything else, you got to know what your magic number is because that's how we increment our subnets. Magic number equals bit value of the bit that we're next to, that we're borrowing. If we borrowed 4 bits, then we're definitely going to want to use the 16. If we borrowed 3 bits, we'll want to use the 32. If we borrowed 2 bits, we'll use 64. See these numbers increment? So you'll have to be able to, either add in these increments or get a calculator. So, 16, 32, 48, 64, 80. See what I mean? And like I said, in the Cisco classes, they're going to include the zero network. They may or may not require it, but I mean, as far as listing it, but you'll want to know that, before you take the test or whatever you're doing. Make sure that you know what the professor is expecting. Should I put that zero network in there in the range and the broadcast for that first network, or should I start with the first subnet? Very important. But in most cases, they're not going to require that first network. But you will know because you're going to understand how these range and broadcast things work here in a few minutes. As I said, this line is telling us how many networks we can get. And if we're using the zero network like in Cisco, then we know we can get 16 networks. I'm only showing you a few of them because I'm not going to draw out the 16 or the 14 for the IT guys. Okay, remember I told you you're going to have to change the subnet mask, and this number tells us what it is. Before, I just would have told you to add these numbers up, and that will give you this number. Now I'm telling you to go ahead and put the added numbers up over top of the list. so that you don't make a mistake. So 128 plus 64 equals 192, plus 32 equals 224, etc., until you get to 255. All right, so that way when you just look, you don't have to add them up. You're just going to look up here. The number on the top next to the line goes into your last number here. Okay, so I put it in. We now know our subnet mask. We know our sitter number, which is 28. We could put that down here. We know how many hosts we're going to get, 16 minus 2. We know how many networks we're going to get, 16, unless you have to take away 2. And we know what our magic number is. Now, we also know the magic number is telling us how our networks are laid out. So this is how it works. We need to fill in the range list and the broadcast list. So the easiest way to do that is to know what the broadcast is in this network. Here's the network. It's 192.168.1.16. And the range is 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. All the numbers, don't worry about these first three. We're just going to talk about this last one. 17, 18, 19, and it runs all the way up to the broadcast. But where's the broadcast? Well, the broadcast is one less than the next network. And we've already set out the networks, right? We added, so if you just keep adding these, this tells you what your broadcast is going to be. One less. So for my broadcast on this first subnet, it's going to have to be 31 because it's one less than 32. Okay, so my broadcast, I put .31. You understand it's 192.168.1.31. And I got that because I went down to the next network and looked, and I said, okay, it's 32, so I need to get 31. And for the next one, the same thing. I looked down to the next network, and that's how I figured out my numbers. Just look down, and you can see 63 is one less than 64. All right. So you can see the reason I got the 95 was I continued in my mind. I know the next number is 96 because 16 more would be 96. So, of course, the broadcast had to be 95. The range is going to consist of the numbers between the network and the broadcast. So the network 16, the range is going to be 17 through 30 because you can't go past 31. Okay, so you can see the network is found by looking at the magic number, which is beside the bar here. It's actually the bit value. And so we just laid out those one by one, 16 plus 16 plus 16 plus 16. And you keep doing that until you get 16 networks, or 14 if you're not using the zero network. All right, and it's going to give you 14 hosts. The broadcast is always one less than the next network. The broadcast is always one less than the next network. The range fits between the network and the broadcast. So if the network is 16 and the broadcast is 31, then the range would be 17 to 30. Fit in. So 16, 17, 18, 19, 20 to 30. So all your usable numbers or hosts, this is the range of hosts that you're able to use. This is your network. You can't use that. It's not a usable number. This is the broadcast. You can't use that. You can't assign that to a computer or to a printer because it's unusable for that purpose. It is a broadcast. And if you want to learn more about what a broadcast is, you can figure that out somewhere else. This is getting to be a long video. So my next network was 32 because I said 16 plus 16 is 32. And after 32 is 33. I know my broadcast for that network is 47 because I looked down and my next network was 48. So I'm kind of working backwards, sort of. Well, I lay out all my networks, and then I can lay out the broadcast because they're always just one less than the next network. And then I can always get the range because I just jam them in between. There should be no spare numbers. After 16 comes 17, and all the numbers after 17 up to 30. Why are we stopping at 30? Because 31 is the broadcast. You can't go past 31. You have to stop at 30. The next network is not a usable number. If you were trying to assign a computer the 192.168.1.32 with this subnet mask, you would have an error. It would not work. Okay? So this is the entire deal. This tells you how to do it. I could sit here and lay them all out for you so you don't have to do the math, but you're always going to have to do the math for yourself, and eventually it'll become second nature because each time you move the line, there's only a few things that can change. You're either going to be working with the 16s, the 8s, the 32s, the 64s, and once you get used to that, these ranges and broadcasts become very second nature. As you work with them, you will start to see patterns and it will really help you out, make it real easy. So I would suggest if you're taking a test or you're doing the uh, examinations for your certification, I would suggest doing 25 or 50 examples. Just go at it. And it's really going to help you so then when you'll see the patterns, I'll show you what I mean. Let's say the teacher asks you, he says, I've got this IP address 192.168.1.35 slash, let's make it 28. Let's say he wants to know what network that is in. So, we can come down here after we've made this chart and we can look and say, well, 35 has to be after the 32 network. So it has to fit within this range, right? That's what it does. It does. And how do we know that? Because when he said 28. Well, right away we say 28, whoop, slide over the line to 28, put the line up. What's the line tell us? It tells us our subnet mask, it tells us our magic number, how many networks and hosts we're going to get. So he's given us all the information there. But after a while you start associating this 28 with the host 16s, right? So over time you'll say, wait a minute, he said 28. 28 is a 16 subnet. It divided by 16s. So two subnets would be 32. So this would be in the 32 network. You would know that just by looking at it. You go, oh, I got it. That's a 16 subnet. So this is the second subnet. Where the first one's 16, the second one's 32. We don't have to draw that out. You see what I mean? Because you'll get used to it. There's only a handful of them. So once you associate the 28 with the 16, you'll know that this is in the second subnet. And then if he says, okay, and I've got a printer that's on the 49, it's 1.2.168.1.49. It's also slash 28. And they need to communicate. Are they going to be able to communicate or do they need a router? Well, if you immediately after you get used to it, you'll say, wait a minute, this is in that subnet and this is in a different one. How do I know that? Because we're dividing by 16, right? Look, 49 is in the 48 subnet. And I know if I'm doing the 16, 16, 32, 48, right? So 48 subnet is going to be between these two hosts, these two nodes, right? So these two nodes cannot communicate directly. They have to have a router to allow them to communicate. And that's what he'll want to know. He'll say, okay, I've got the 35, I've got the 49, and they're both a slash 28. Can they communicate? Or are they on the same network? Or what network are they on? And you'll immediately look and say, well, these are 16s because I know I look at the 28. They're 16s. So this is in the second subnet. This is in the third subnet. This is in the 32 subnet. This is in the 48 subnet. I can see that. I don't have to draw all this out. But once you draw these out a handful of times, 20, 30 times, this will all come to you naturally. All right. This is why I say this is the magic. Learning how to do this little thing with the paper and drawing it out is cool because you'll never be stuck no matter what. But better than that is it gives you this concept, this visual that you can understand. And when you move the line one way, you increase the number of networks, but decrease the number of hosts. See that? So if I slide my line this way, look how much I'm going to get 64 networks, but I'm only going to get 4 hosts per network. Actually, 2 because I got to take away 2. So you wouldn't want to use that unless you had a network where you only had 2 things that needed to be there. Or let's say you just had you and your printer and you wanted to be separated. But it's just very unusual. Typically, it's going to be somewhere up here. You're going to be using the 16s, the 32s, you know, somewhere up here in the middle. So no matter what the professor tells you, if you have this concept, or if you can draw out this little thing with your on a piece of paper real quick, you will have all the information you need to answer any question he asks once you've drawn it out. Because you can, if he says, what subnet is this in, you can look at this right away and you can say 35 is in the 32 subnet. Why? Because we're dividing by 16s. I know it. What's the broadcast? Well, you can come over here and look at your chart, but if you didn't draw the chart, you'll know that we're dividing by 16s. So the 35 is going to be in the 32 network, and it's going to have the 47 broadcast. Why? Because the next network's going to be 48 because we're adding 16 each time. 32, 48, 60. See the progression? I mean 80. So you just do the 16s, and once you get used to counting by 16, it's really going to help. Just counting by 16. 48, 64, 80. You know, 48, 64, 80. A lot of times, that's a hard thing, but once you get it, you will have it. And if you do this often, it will come very naturally to you. I don't want you to get stressed with this thing because this is one of the things that stress most of the people, and then they don't have time to learn all the other crap that they have to learn. It's mind-boggling. There's so much stuff out there to learn. So this should be the easiest thing that you learn. If you need any help, please message me and I will explain. If you want if you need some more specific examples or whatever, please message me and I'll try to get back with you as soon as I can. Hopefully the same day or even within a couple hours if I can. Good talk.